Hi everyone, and welcome back to Consider It All Joy. We are in chapter 8 now, and I'm excited because, like I've said before, this is the chapter I have been waiting for personally, because this is the chapter that I read a piece from and got me really excited to read this book first of all, and then eventually decide to share it with you guys. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive in. So this week we are talking about authority. And the principle that I want to share for this week is one of the foundational heart issues in the life of every child is authority. Teaching and modeling the protective beauty of authority is one of the foundations of good parenting. So first, I just want to tell you a little story on my daughter and hope that she doesn't see this or doesn't get embarrassed or what. I'm not going to use a current story, but I do want to give this example because I know that other parents out there have probably been in similar situations, or in some way you have dealt with defiance or stubbornness from your child. We know this. Even if you have an extremely passive child, in some way, your children have disobeyed you and been defiant at some point in their lives. So when Lily was a toddler, she took a nap every day, but she randomly would have these extremely hard days where she could not give in to taking a nap for the life of her. Like, she would be so against the idea of going to sleep for a nap that it would send her into these like fits of rage. And it didn't happen very often. Thankfully, it wasn't an everyday occurrence. You probably think, well, why would you just, let it go and not make her take a nap that day? I don't know if it was a battle of wills between her and I or what, but I got into routines and I wanted to, follow through with my routine. And also, we all know how, children need naps. Certain children especially just don't function well if they don't nap. And so it sets the tone for the whole rest of your day if your kids don't nap sometimes. If they need a nap, they need a nap. So I knew as a mom, it was just going to be harder for her if she didn't just give in and go to sleep and just sleep for a half hour or an hour. But she would have these days where she would be in all out fits of rage, absolutely not going to take a nap, like can't get her to lay down, can't lay with her to get her to calm down. She would just scream and yell and fight against you with her body. Like, oh gosh, it was just the most stressful thing for me. A couple times, I will admit that I just walked out the door and left her to Jared because I was like, I literally can't function with this. I can't deal with it. She's crossed a line and I need a break. So I would go out and just walk down the street, walk around the block, do something to cool off and let go of that. And usually by the time I got home, he had somehow gotten her to sleep because he knew how to deal with her when she got to that point. And I just did not. And so I don't know if any of you guys have been in that situation. Maybe you experienced that. Maybe you have a child who experiences that type of struggle daily. Maybe you have a child who just is so strong-willed that it's a battle of wills every day to get them to eat their veggies or their lunch, or get them to take a nap, or whatever it is. Get them to obey, get them to do the dishes, get them to come home on time, whatever it is that, maybe you have a child where this is a constant struggle all the time. But I just want to say, what is going on in these instances is it's between the child and parent. What's happening in these moments, it goes so much deeper. We've talked about this. It goes so much deeper than the actual acts of disrespect or disobedience. These are symptoms of the deep root underneath that is the issue of authority. Okay? So, you could argue, I think, you could argue that if you don't deal with this fundamental heart issue, all the good things that we seek to accomplish as a tool of God in our children's lives, if we don't deal with that deep root, that it's not going to work. Everything that we're trying to accomplish, all of the good things that we are trying to implement with our children, all of the hard work that we're putting in, none of it is going to come too much if we don't deal with this heart issue. And our children need to learn early that they were born into a world of authority. That is just how it works. They're born into a world of authority, and they're not it. They are not the authority. Submission to authority that is not me is unnatural to us. It's unnatural for any sinner to fall into that easily. I mean, submission to authority is not something that we come about very easily. It's not natural to us. Sin makes us want our own way. Sin convinces us that we know better. How many of you guys can say you have a child that hits a certain age and they just know everything better than you? They know how to do all of the things a better way than you could ever instruct them. I mean, we all have at least one or have experienced moments like this with our children. They just know better. And that is a result of sin at the root of it, because sin convinces us that we know better. And sin will always insert us as the center of our own world. And that's a place that we know God alone needs to be. That's his spot. That's reserved for him. But sin convinces us that we are the center of our world, especially for our children that are still growing. Their minds are growing and developing. They're still learning. They definitely believe that they are the center of their own world, because as babies and toddlers, they are. They're the center of their world. They're the center of our world. Everything revolves around them. And so fights over clothing choices and TV shows and music they listen to, and bedtime, when they're going to go to sleep at night, or the condition of their room. Are they going to keep it clean, or do they have the freedom to just do whatever they want in there? Like, they're not first about the actual issues alone. They are about this fundamental battle inside of their heart that basically they're constantly asking themselves, who will decide how I live? And I don't think this is just specific to children. I think that we all struggle with this question and applying it to our lives, because of our sinful nature, we want to decide how we live. We want to decide what we do, where we go, who has the power over our lives. We want that to be us. We know better. If we follow God, we know that he is the one who is supposed to be in charge. But it's, again, this constant heart battle of giving over that control and submitting to him. So 2 Corinthians 5:15 is a good word to address this. And he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves. And that's not only talking about being selfless and, serving others and putting others before you. It's also talking about letting go of this idea of self-rule, of you being the authority in your life. Jesus knew that he was the only way for us to be free of our self-focused, self-absorbed desire for self-rule. He knew that he was the only freedom from that. We as parents, we have no power to deliver our children from this natural addiction to self-rule. But Jesus does. So we have this rescue, this freedom, this salvation from ourselves in Jesus. Our work as parents to establish biblical authority in the lives of our children, it is doing gospel work. It is gospel work in our homes. It is gospel work in our families, in our children. And authority work is grace work. They tie together. I'm going to read from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. And that promise is that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." So, we've talked before about how we are ambassadors of Jesus to our children. And exercising ambassadorial authority, using authority under us being ambassadors, is doing gospel work. We, as ambassadors of God, do not have authority in and of ourselves. We don't. Maybe that's a struggle for you to admit, but we don't have that power and that authority without His help. We have authority only because we represent a king who has authority. This next piece that I'm about to go into is the reason that I was drawn to this book. It's something that I've been really excited to share with you guys because it affected me so strongly. And I'm going to try not to get emotional when I go through this, but it may happen. Just brace yourselves. So I'm going to read this quote directly and then try to break it down. Here's God's amazing plan. He makes His invisible authority visible by sending visible authority figures, that's you and I, to our children, as His representatives or as His ambassadors, as we've talked about. This means that every time you and I exercise authority in the lives of our children, it must be a beautiful picture of the authority of God. In the lives of your children, you are the look of God's face. You are the touch of His hand, and you are the tone of His voice. You must never exercise authority in an angry, abusive, or selfish way. I'm going to say that again because it's really hard to grab onto. We must never use our authority in an angry, abusive, or selfish way. Why? Because we have been put in our position as parents to display to our children how beautiful and wise and patient and guiding and protecting and rescuing and forgiving God's authority is. The first time I read that, I will tell you guys, it completely wrecked me because I fail. I fail at this so very often. I fail at this every day. And for some reason, I've always been told, who you had as a father in your life, will shape the way that you view God, because if that was the example of fatherly love in your life and it wasn't good, or there were things messed up about it, it was unhealthy in some way, that's going to warp your view of God's fatherly love in your life. I've learned this early on, and I've, thought about it through my life, but something about the way that this book described that, about how us showing authority to our children, the way that we correct them and discipline them and just lead them, is supposed to be a beautiful picture of how God leads us. And so very often that is not the case. I can tell you 100% honestly, I do not think that I am showing a beautiful picture of God's authority to my children when I am in the worst of my frustration and impatience with them. It is extremely hard to use self-control and to discipline in a loving, kind, patient, forgiving way. When you are, especially like we've talked about in the past, when you are dealing with the same thing that you've dealt with multiple times and you're frustrated as to why you're here again, dealing with it again, it becomes very, very difficult to maintain your peace and your self-control and to address those things in the proper way. So thinking about that, thinking back on the way that I've disciplined my children and the way that I've represented authority to them in the past can definitely break my heart, because I have fallen short when it comes to what this book is addressing. I have fallen short in showing them a beautiful picture of God's authority. So, if we exercise authority in a lazy, abusive, selfish way, we will deepen and strengthen the natural rebellion to authority that our children already have to fight against. It's already naturally in our children because it's naturally in all of us. Our sin nature pulls us towards rebellion and disobedience. And if we are enforcing these negative views of authority, we're just reinforcing to them and making their rebellion deeper and stronger, because they don't have anything to show a positive light on that. They don't have anything to show them that submission to authority can be life-giving, can bring you freedom. When you submit to God's authority, He can make so much of your life and He can do so much through you that He can't do if you're living with little walls up to being submitted to Him. And we all struggle in different areas where we have walls up that we give this much to God, we submit this much to Him, but not this. We all have our separate areas that we struggle to submit to God. And again, it's so important for us to show our children the best that we can what godly authority is, because we do not want to make their struggle any harder than it already is, just being a human. If we can show our children the right view of authority, they will learn that submission to His authority is where life and freedom are found. So I want to stop for a minute, and I want you to inwardly reflect. As hard as it can be, as painful as it can be, to look at yourself and think about what kind of picture are your children getting of God's authority by the way you exercise yours. What kind of picture are they getting? Are they getting the right picture? As we talked about before, God's authority is gracious, it's patient, it's forgiving, it's rescuing. Is that the kind of picture we are showing when we are exerting authority over our children, when we're disciplining them, when we're correcting them, when we're leading them, when we're sharing wisdom with them? Is it in the right way? So, I will say that as hard as it was to take a look at how I'm falling short when it comes to this chapter, Again, it's so comforting and reassuring to know that I don't have to say, I can't do that. It literally says back here, you can never, ever show anger. Like, where is it? You can never show anger or be abusive or be selfish when you're showing authority. You know how hard that is to do, to not exert your authority over your children in a selfish manner because you just want them to do what you want them to do at that moment? That so often leads to us yelling at them or lashing out or grounding them or sending them to their rooms or their own space or snapping at them to be quiet because of our own selfish desires. And it is so hard to lay that down. It's hard for us to submit to God's authority and have self-control in those moments. So you would think that our view of our relationship with God and how hard it is for us to give up control and to let Him, take charge of our lives. You would think that that would make us more patient and understanding with our children, but it just doesn't usually work out that way. I would love for it to. And God does use different things in my life to say, listen, this is exactly how I feel about you. When I'm frustrated with my kids for just stumbling into the same thing over and over and over and not obeying me in something that I am teaching them because it would better their life. It would make something easier for them in the long run. And God feels the same way about us. It's like, listen, if you would just get a handle on this, what I'm trying to teach you, if you could just give this to me, if you could just ask me for help, your life would be so much easier because I could help you. And it's the same for how we treat our children. But the thing is that this can seem like way more than we could possibly do in ourselves. And it is. It's 100% more than we can do with our own natural ability, which is why, again, I come back to turning to Him, turning everything over to Him, because we are human and sometimes we are going to fail at showing God's perfect picture of authority because we are not perfect. We are not without sin. Our sinful nature likes to take over often just as much as our children's. And we have His help though. We can always turn to Him. And when we set the tone ourselves first, we go to God, we tell Him, I submit this to you, God. I'm submitting to your authority. Your will in my life is what I want over my own will. Your desires for my life is what I want over my own desires. When we get that together first, we can then easier show it to our children. And it's a daily thing. I know that I am a broken record with this, but if we could really grasp starting our day, handing it over to God every morning, before we even interact with our children, if possible. I know some of us have babies and little ones that don't give us a chance to start our day on the right foot. Often we just have to jump right into parenting. But whenever you get that chance to break away for a few minutes, or even when you're in the middle of, nursing the baby or making breakfast or dealing with somebody's broken something in your face as soon as your eyes pop open in the morning, if you could just take the first opportunity that you find to just talk to God and say, I'm giving this day to you, God. I want to show authority to my children the best way that I possibly can. I want to show your beautiful picture of forgiveness and grace and I need your help. I can't do it. I am a human with a sinful nature, God, and I need your help every day to do this thing right. And he is faithful to answer. He is. And it will get easier as we learn to just submit to him and just have this proper view of authority, this healthy view of authority, knowing that authority is not there to dominate or to lord over us. That is not God's nature, and it shouldn't be ours for our children. We shouldn't turn this into this need for control, because that's not the healthy way to show authority. I'm going to pray for us and close. God, I thank you for this word. I thank you for this revelation of truth, that it is our job as ambassadors from you to our children to show them this wonderful picture of what authority can be when it is healthy, when it is right, when it is from you. And I pray, God, that where we struggle and where we fail and where we are overwhelmed and where we get knocked down, that you help us get right back up again. And when we fail, we would turn to you, God, and we would know that your grace is there to cover us, and we can then in turn extend that grace to our children. And I pray, God, that every family that is watching is blessed. Every parent who is watching is blessed, that you move in every single family and every child and every relationship between mother and daughter and father and son and mother and son and father and daughter. God, that you strengthen every single one of these relationships until they look like this beautiful picture of a family that you have ordained and called us to be in every home, God. Thank you, Jesus, again for this day, for this word. And I pray, God, that you bless each person. Again, protect them. Amen. Thank you guys again. I love this chapter, and I forgot to mention this is only part 1 of authority. The chapter was long and full of so much amazing information that I'm going to split it into 2 weeks. So this is part 1 of authority. Thank you guys, and I will see you again next week.
Whoa.